The sun hung low over the rolling plains, casting long shadows across the sprawling ranch that had been in the Harper family for generations. John Harper, the rancher, stood at the edge of the corral, watching the last of the cattle make their way back to the barns. His weathered face, etched with deep lines from decades of hard work under the unforgiving sun, betrayed both exhaustion and quiet resilience. The ranch was vast, stretching as far as the eye could see, but for John, its expanse only amplified the loneliness that had settled in his chest after the passing of his wife, Mary. 5 years prior, every day followed a routine almost ritualistic in its simplicity, feeding the animals, repairing fences, checking the irrigation channels, and tending to the fields. The work was relentless, and it was the only thing that kept John's mind from drifting into memories that often threatened to overwhelm him. Mary had been the heart of the ranch, the one who managed the household, nurtured the land with her green thumb, and brought warmth to the cold, unyielding structure of the farmhouse. Since her passing, the house had become a silent reminder of what he had lost, empty rooms echoing with memories, untouched quilts, and the faint scent of lavender lingering in the corners. John's social life had dwindled to almost nothing. The neighboring ranchers, once friends and companions in both work and leisure, now only waved from a distance, unsure of how to breach the invisible wall he had erected around himself. The local town was a 20-mile ride away, and visits there were rare, reserved only for urgent supplies or medical needs. Even then, John's interaction was limited to nods, brief exchanges at the general store, and the occasional greeting at the church on Sundays. People often whispered about the lonely old rancher, but no one truly knew him. Despite the solitude, John found a strange comfort in his isolation. The ranch was his kingdom, and every corner of it told a story. The old oak by the creek marked the spot where his father had taught him to ride a horse. The barn, with its creaking wooden beams, held decades of memories, from the laughter of family gatherings to the late-night work sessions during harvest season. Here, in the rhythm of labor and the quiet of the open plains, John felt a connection to something larger than himself. Yet beneath this stoic exterior lay a yearning, a subtle, unspoken longing for companionship, for someone who understood the weight of loss and the solace of shared silence. At night, the loneliness hit hardest. The wind would sweep across the plains, rattling the windows and carrying the faint scent of distant fires and wildflowers. John would sit by the fireplace, a glass of whiskey in hand, staring at the flames as memories of Mary danced before his eyes. He remembered her laughter, the way she could coax life from the barren soil, and the gentle way she would soothe him after a long day's work. These memories were bittersweet, a mix of warmth and pain, reminding him both of love and of the void her absence had created. Yet, even in this solitude, there was a quiet strength in John. He was a man shaped by hardship, loss, and relentless labor, capable of enduring both the unforgiving land and the storms of the heart. The ranch had taught him resilience, patience, and the value of hard work. And though he did not yet realize it, life had a way of changing, even for someone as rooted in solitude as he was. The arrival of someone new, a person who would challenge the stillness of his life and awaken feelings long buried, was about to set the wheels of fate in motion, changing the course of John Harper's lonely existence forever. The crisp morning air carried the scent of dew and freshly tilled soil as the rumble of a wagon echoed down the winding dirt road leading to John Harper's ranch. On the back of the wagon, a small collection of belongings bounced gently with each wheel's turn. A few crates, a suitcase patched with tape, and a single wooden trunk that looked as though it had weathered more storms than the road itself. Sitting atop the trunk was a woman, her dark hair loosely tied, eyes fixed on the horizon with a mixture of apprehension and resolve. She was Amelia Carter, a 24-year-old widow, recently widowed after a sudden tragedy had taken her husband from her. Amelia had come to this remote area not out of whim, but necessity. She inherited a modest parcel of land from a distant relative, and it was her only opportunity to start anew, far from the town where gossip followed every misstep and every glance. Though grief still clung to her like a shadow, she carried herself with a quiet determination. Life had dealt her a cruel hand, yet she refused to let it define her. Each mile she traveled toward the Harper Ranch felt like a step away from sorrow and a step toward self-reliance. The ranch's vastness was overwhelming at first glance. Rolling fields stretched endlessly, interrupted only by clusters of oak and the occasional pond that mirrored the sky. Amelia had grown up in the city, and the rugged openness of the countryside was both intimidating and liberating. She could hear the low murmur of cattle and the rhythmic creak of fences swaying with the morning wind. It was unlike anything she had known before, a world where survival depended on grit, patience, and a connection with the land itself. When Amelia arrived at the farmhouse, she found John already at work inspecting the northern fence line. He had noticed the wagon long before it reached the gate, a rare occurrence on a quiet morning. His first instinct was caution. Visitors were uncommon and strangers even more so. Yet there was something about the woman's posture, calm yet unyielding, that piqued his curiosity. She dismounted with careful grace, setting down her trunk with a soft thud, and approached him with a polite nod. "Morning," she said, her voice steady but gentle. "I'm Amelia Carter. I've just inherited the property nearby and was hoping you could point me in the right direction." John studied her for a moment, noting the faint dust on her boots, the sun-kissed edges of her cheeks, and the resilience in her eyes. He nodded slowly, a mix of caution and polite courtesy guiding his response. "Morning. You're not far off. Follow this path and you'll reach the Carter plot in about a mile." Amelia thanked him, her words sincere. Yet there was an unspoken tension between them, a subtle recognition that both were wary of change in their carefully controlled worlds. John returned to his work, but he couldn't shake the image of the young widow from his mind, the quiet confidence in her movements, the determination in her gaze, and a sense that her arrival would bring unexpected disruptions to the stillness he had long grown accustomed to. Over the following days, Amelia began settling into her new home. The farmhouse was modest, but she took to it with surprising ease, unpacking her belongings with a methodical patience and tending to her land with the careful precision of someone determined to prove her capability. John observed from a distance, noting her independence and resourcefulness. There was a natural rhythm in her actions, a harmony with the land that mirrored his own. But there was also a vulnerability, a lingering sadness that spoke of losses yet to be healed, and so the stage was set. Two solitary souls, each shaped by loss and circumstance, brought together by fate in the sweeping expanse of the Harper Ranch. Unseen by either, the seeds of curiosity and connection had been sown, subtle, almost imperceptible, yet destined to grow into something far more profound than either of them could anticipate. Amelia's arrival was not just the beginning of a new chapter in her life, but the catalyst for change in John Harper's long, quiet world. The sun had climbed higher in the sky, casting warm, golden light across the Harper Ranch. Birds sang from the oak trees, and the low murmur of cattle moving across the fields filled the air. John Harper was inspecting the southern pasture, tightening a loose fence post when he noticed movement near the creek that ran along the edge of the property. At first he thought it was a stray calf, but as he drew closer he realized it was Amelia. She was crouched by the creek, carefully washing a few metal tools she must have brought from her new home. The water sparkled around her hands, catching the sunlight in fleeting flashes. She seemed absorbed in her task, unaware of his approach, and for a moment John paused, observing her quietly. There was something different about her, not just her presence, but the way she interacted with the land. She moved with purpose, yet there was a softness, a reverence for the natural world that reminded him of Mary. Amelia looked up suddenly, startled by a twig snapping under John's boot. She straightened quickly, wiping her hands on a rag, and a brief blush colored her cheeks. "Oh, I didn't hear you coming," she said, her voice carrying a mix of apology and surprise. John offered a curt nod. "Didn't mean to startle you. Just checking the fence line." His voice was gruff but not unfriendly. He noticed the wary look in her eyes. the kind of cautious politeness people adopt when they're unsure of their surroundings. "I didn't think anyone would be out here at this hour," she said, trying to regain composure. Her gaze flicked to the creek, then back to him, betraying a flicker of curiosity. I'm trying to get the tools cleaned before they rust." John's lips twitched, almost a smile. "You've got a good work ethic," he said. "Not many people would bother with that out here." He gestured to the pasture. "The land demands care, or it'll remind you who's in charge." Amelia nodded, appreciating his acknowledgement, but not quite sure how to read him. She sensed a rugged authority in John Harper, the kind that comes from years of hard labor and personal loss. There was also an undercurrent of solitude, something she felt she could relate to more than she expected. For a moment, neither spoke, and the sounds of the ranch, the soft swish of grass, the distant lowing of cattle, the occasional call of a bird filled the space between them. Breaking the silence, Amelia offered a small smile. "I suppose I'll have to learn quickly. The land doesn't forgive mistakes." "True enough," John said, "but it can teach patience. And sometimes it teaches you who you really are." He paused, then added almost reluctantly, "I'm John, by the way." "Amelia," she replied, extending a hand, which he shook firmly. Their fingers lingered just a fraction longer than necessary, a brief unspoken acknowledgement of connection. After a few moments, Amelia glanced at her tools again. "I should finish these before they dry," she said, a hint of determination in her tone. John nodded, stepping back to allow her the space, though he couldn't resist one last glance as he resumed his work along the fence. Though their encounter had been brief and outwardly mundane, it left a subtle impression on both of them. John found himself thinking of her unusual diligence and the quiet confidence she carried. Amelia, meanwhile, felt a mix of curiosity and caution, a sense that the gruff rancher might be a potential ally or challenge in her new life. That first encounter, simple as it seemed, was the beginning of a delicate dance between two solitary souls. It was a meeting that neither would forget, the kind of chance encounter that in time would evolve into a bond shaped by shared struggles, mutual respect, and the stirring of emotions they had long buried. In the vast expanse of the Harper Ranch, fate had quietly begun weaving its threads. The days that followed Amelia's arrival were filled with the quiet rhythm of ranch life. John Harper and Amelia Carter crossed paths frequently, sometimes by chance, sometimes deliberately, as the demands of work drew them toward the same tasks. At first, their interactions were short and functional. A nod here, a polite word there, exchanged over the clatter of tools or the lowing of cattle. Yet, beneath the surface, a subtle awareness began to grow, a recognition of someone who understood the land and, perhaps unknowingly, the weight of loss that both carried. One morning, John noticed Amelia struggling to mend a broken section of fence near the creek. The wood was old, splintered, and unwieldy, and her small frame was clearly taxed by the heavy posts. John approached, initially intending only to offer advice, but as he drew near, he found himself saying, "Here, let me help you with that." Amelia hesitated, pride flickering in her eyes, but ultimately nodded. Together, they lifted the heavy post, positioning it carefully into place. The work was silent at first, the sound of hands gripping wood and the scrape of nails filling the space between them. Then, without realizing it, a conversation began to flow, tentative, cautious, yet genuine. John asked about her hometown, her late husband, and how she had come to inherit the land. Amelia, in turn, listened as he spoke sparingly about the ranch, sharing just enough to paint the picture of a life forged by labor, loss, and solitude. It was during these moments of shared effort that a subtle connection began to form. Amelia admired John's knowledge of the land, his meticulous attention to detail, and the quiet strength that allowed him to endure years of hardship. John, meanwhile, was drawn to Amelia's determination, her resilience in the face of grief, and the spark of life she brought to a place that had long been silent. They began to recognize in each other a mirror of their own experiences. Both had known love, loss, and the challenge of moving forward alone. Over the weeks, small gestures became routine. John would leave fresh milk or eggs at Amelia's doorstep, a quiet acknowledgement of respect and neighborly care. Amelia, in turn, would bake bread or prepare a simple meal to share with him when paths crossed, often leaving it on the porch with a polite note. These gestures, seemingly ordinary, carried weight. They were tokens of trust, tentative steps toward intimacy, and a language of connection that neither had spoken in years. The townsfolk began to notice the subtle shift as well. Rumors, gentle at first, began to circulate about the two solitary figures frequently seen together in the fields. John, usually indifferent to gossip, found himself thinking more about Amelia than he cared to admit. The initial wariness that had marked their first encounter gradually gave way to a quiet anticipation, an eagerness to see her, to exchange words, and to share in the labor that bound them to the land. Yet, even as the bond strengthened, both were mindful of boundaries. Amelia guarded her heart, conscious of her grief and the memory of her late husband. John, too, struggled with the idea of opening himself to someone new after years of isolation. There was a delicate balance between curiosity and caution, attraction and restraint, a tension that made each encounter charged with unspoken possibilities. By the end of the month, what had begun as polite recognition had transformed into genuine companionship. The work they shared on the ranch became a foundation for trust and understanding. Laughter began to punctuate their conversations. Subtle smiles replaced formal nods, and the heavy silence that had once defined the Harper Ranch was slowly replaced by warmth. In the midst of vast fields and endless skies, two solitary hearts were beginning to find in each other a reflection of what they had longed for: connection, understanding, and the possibility of something more profound than either had dared to imagine. The town of Cedar Creek was small, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business long before it happened. News traveled faster than the wind across the plains, and any unusual occurrence, or any hint of romance, was immediately subject to scrutiny. The arrival of Amelia Carter had already piqued curiosity, but it was the growing connection between her and John Harper that began to fuel whispered conversations in the grocery store, the church, and even at the local saloon. At first, the gossip was subtle. A neighbor would remark on seeing them together while fixing fences or sharing a brief lunch break in the fields. "Have you noticed Harper helping that young widow with her land?" Someone would say, voice just loud enough to carry. Another would respond with a skeptical hum. "She's sweet enough, but Harper's been alone for years. Wonder what's going on there?" Amelia was largely unaware of the murmurs at first. Her days were consumed by settling into her new property and managing the work that came with it. She welcomed John's occasional guidance and help, seeing it as practical rather than personal. Yet she couldn't completely ignore the way neighbors' glances lingered or how some townsfolk seemed to study her every move. She felt a mixture of embarrassment and defiance, embarrassment at being watched, defiance at being judged for simply trying to live her life. John, on the other hand, was more attuned to the subtle tension. He had lived in Cedar Creek all his life and understood the weight of its social undercurrents. Though he normally ignored gossip, he noticed changes in people's behavior. Quiet side glances, pointed questions, and the faint smirks of those who took pleasure in observing others' lives. It frustrated him, but he kept his distance, refusing to let the whispers dictate his actions or his feelings toward Amelia. Despite the gossip, the bond between John and Amelia continued to grow. They shared moments of quiet laughter as they repaired fences, harvested crops, or tended to the animals. They discussed the challenges of ranch life, swapped stories of their childhoods, and, slowly, began to reveal glimpses of the vulnerabilities that had long been hidden. Each interaction, though simple, carried weight, and both began to recognize that their connection was deepening beyond casual friendship. Yet, the growing attention from the townsfolk introduced a subtle tension. Amelia became increasingly self-conscious, aware that her every action was being observed and interpreted. John, normally stoic and unbothered by others' opinions, found himself quietly protective, occasionally offering a sharp word or a warning glance to anyone who tried to pry too deeply. The world outside the ranch began to encroach on their private space. creating an unspoken conflict between desire and discretion, curiosity and caution. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, John and Amelia worked together to mend a section of the barn roof. From the edge of the field, Mrs. Patterson, a longtime neighbor, peered through her binoculars and quickly shared what she saw with her friends at the market the next morning. By the next week, half the town was abuzz with speculation. Were John and Amelia more than neighbors? Was there a budding romance forming on the Harper Ranch? Though the gossip was uncomfortable, it had an unintended effect. It forced both John and Amelia to acknowledge their growing feelings. The whispers of the town no longer carried merely judgment. They became a mirror reflecting emotions neither could fully articulate. In the quiet of the fields beneath the wide-open sky, they began to understand that what they shared was private, fragile, and potentially transformative. The world could speculate all it wanted. But their connection, born from shared work, quiet trust, and mutual understanding, was theirs alone. And so, the stage was set for a delicate balancing act, navigating the scrutiny of a small town while tending to a growing bond that neither expected, yet both had secretly been longing for. The Harper Ranch, once a place of solitude, was now a space where hearts quietly collided under the watchful eyes of neighbors and the endless expanse of the open plains. The summer sun had begun to settle into long, lazy afternoons, casting a golden haze over the Harper Ranch. The air was thick with the scent of hay, wildflowers, and the faint musk of the cattle, creating a rhythm that felt timeless and unchanging. It was during one of these quiet afternoons that John and Amelia's bond took an unexpected turn, shifting from companionship to something far deeper, something neither had anticipated but both had been silently craving. It started with small moments, subtle yet significant. John had been fixing a section of the barn roof that had been damaged during a recent storm. Amelia, carrying a basket of freshly washed linens from her farmhouse, stumbled slightly on the uneven ground. John instinctively reached out, steadying her with firm hands, their fingers brushing briefly. The touch was fleeting, but it lingered in both their minds long after. Amelia's cheeks flushed, and John felt an unfamiliar warmth spread across his chest, a sensation he hadn't felt in years. Over the following days, their interactions grew bolder. They lingered longer during shared tasks, exchanging laughter and stories, teasing each other lightly about mistakes or quirks. Amelia would watch John with an intensity that surprised even her, noticing the way his hands moved skillfully over the tools, how his eyes softened when he looked at the land, and the subtle way his jaw tightened when he was deep in thought. John, in turn, found himself seeking out her presence more frequently, drawn to the vitality and resilience she carried with her, and the way she seemed to understand the ranch and him in ways few others ever had. The turning point came one evening when a sudden rainstorm caught them both outside. They took shelter under the old oak by the creek, its branches providing scant protection from the relentless downpour. Amelia's hair was damp, clinging to her face, and her clothes were soaked, yet she laughed freely, the sound ringing clear and warm across the fields. John couldn't help but smile, feeling a strange pull toward her that went beyond friendship. "You're reckless," he said, though his tone lacked its usual gruffness. "And you're no fun," she shot back, grinning. The playfulness in her voice mirrored the lightness he hadn't realized he'd missed. For a moment, they stood in silence, watching the rain drip from the branches into the creek below. Then, without warning, John reached out, brushing a wet strand of hair from her face. Amelia's eyes met his, wide and uncertain, yet filled with a flicker of anticipation. Neither spoke. Words felt unnecessary, inadequate to capture the sudden intensity that had risen between them. In that fleeting moment, the barrier of solitude and caution fell away, replaced by something raw, immediate, and undeniable. From that day forward, their relationship subtly shifted. Shared glances lingered longer, touches became more deliberate, and conversations carried a new warmth and intimacy. They began to recognize feelings they had both tried to suppress: attraction, longing, and the fragile hope that love could bloom again, even after loss. The ranch, which had once been a place of labor and solitude, now carried the quiet electricity of budding romance. Yet the unexpectedness of their feelings brought its own challenges. Both were acutely aware of the town's watchful eyes and the lingering shadows of past heartbreak. Amelia feared opening her heart too quickly, worried about repeating history, while John grappled with the vulnerability of allowing someone new into a life he had carefully structured around solitude. Despite these uncertainties, neither could deny the connection that had taken root, growing stronger with each shared smile, each fleeting touch, and every moment of companionship under the wide-open sky. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the fields in gold and crimson, John and Amelia understood that something profound was beginning. What had started as cautious friendship had transformed into something more potent, more dangerous, and infinitely more beautiful. An unexpected romance that neither had anticipated but both secretly welcomed. A love that promised to challenge their pasts and redefine the future of the Harper Ranch. The Harper Ranch had never seen a storm like the one that rolled in that evening. Dark clouds stretched across the horizon, heavy with rain, and the wind swept through the fields with a force that rattled the barns and bent the trees. John and Amelia had been working together in the lower pasture when the first drops began to fall, forcing them to seek shelter under the main barn's overhang. They laughed nervously at their predicament, brushing rain-soaked hair from their faces and exchanging fleeting glances that carried a weight neither had fully acknowledged. As the storm raged, Amelia fumbled with a bundle of papers she had brought from her farmhouse. Property deeds, tax records, and letters from distant relatives. A gust of wind caught one of the papers, scattering it across the muddy ground. John moved quickly to help, stepping into the puddles, and together they retrieved the sheets. It was then that Amelia noticed a document she hadn't paid close attention to before. An old, yellowed letter tucked between the property deeds. She unfolded it carefully, and her eyes widened as she read the words. The letter, written decades earlier, revealed a secret about the Harper Ranch, one that directly involved John's family and, indirectly, her own. According to the letter, part of the land Amelia had inherited had been promised to another relative long ago, and an agreement had been quietly bypassed by John's late father. The revelation was jarring, exposing a hidden history that could potentially threaten the boundaries of her newly acquired property. Amelia's voice trembled as she looked up at John. "John, this letter. It says the land I inherited. It belongs, at least partially, to someone else. Your family knew about this, didn't they?" John's expression darkened. He had known about the old agreement, of course, but it had always been buried beneath years of family decisions, old disputes, and the quiet management of the ranch. "It's complicated," he admitted, his voice low and tight. "It's been in the family for generations. We never intended for anyone to get hurt." Amelia felt a mix of anger, betrayal, and disbelief. She had trusted him, had begun to feel safe on the land she thought was hers, only to discover that its history was tangled in secrets she had never been told. "You mean to say, all this time you never mentioned this?" Her tone was sharp, cutting through the roar of the storm. John stepped closer, his eyes sincere, trying to bridge the gap her words had created. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want it to affect what we were building. I thought it was better to handle it quietly, without bringing unnecessary worry to you." The revelation cast a heavy shadow over their growing romance. Amelia struggled to reconcile the man she had come to admire and care for with the weight of a secret that now threatened the stability of her life. The storm outside mirrored the turmoil within her, a tempest of doubt, fear, and uncertainty. For John, the moment was equally wrenching. He realized that no matter how well-intentioned his actions had been, the truth had the power to shake the fragile trust they had nurtured. He felt the sharp sting of guilt, knowing that his silence, even if protective, had inadvertently endangered the connection they had fought to cultivate. As the rain pounded against the roof, they stood in tense silence, the unspoken words hanging heavy between them. The revelation was more than a matter of land or legacy. It was a test of their honesty, their patience, and the depth of the bond that had begun to form. In that moment, both understood that moving forward would require more than affection. It would demand courage, transparency, and a willingness to confront the past together, no matter how painful the truth might be. By the time the storm began to abate, the path forward was uncertain. The hidden truth had been uncovered, and with it came the realization that their relationship, once blossoming under the wide-open skies, would now face trials that neither had anticipated. Yet, beneath the tension, a spark of resilience remained, the hope that love, once tested, could endure, even in the face of secrets that threatened to divide them. The days following the storm were heavy with tension. The Harper Ranch, usually a place of rhythm and calm, now felt suffocating to both John and Amelia. The revelation of the hidden letter hung over them like a shadow, altering every glance, every word, and every shared moment. Where once there had been laughter and quiet companionship, now there was hesitancy, suspicion, and a delicate distance neither knew how to bridge. Amelia busied herself with her farmhouse, working tirelessly on repairs and organizing her land. She avoided lingering near John, fearing that her emotions might betray her sense of control. Yet every time she saw him from a distance, checking fences, tending the animals, her heart twisted with a mixture of anger, hurt, and longing. She wanted to confront him, demand honesty, or simply escape the situation entirely, but she also recognized the complexity of the truth he had withheld. The past was not simple, and the web of family obligations and unspoken agreements was not easily untangled. John, for his part, was equally conflicted. He had hoped that their bond, built on shared work and subtle connection, could withstand the storm of curiosity and gossip, but the revelation reminded him that intentions alone were not enough. His silence, though protective in nature, had caused more harm than he had anticipated. He felt the weight of responsibility, not only to the land he had inherited, but to the woman whose trust he had inadvertently shaken. Each time he approached Amelia, she would look away, her eyes cool and guarded, and he knew that his presence, once comforting, now carried the risk of pain. The small town, as if sensing the strain, became a quieter but more observant presence. Neighbors whispered about the visible distance between the two, speculating that the connection they had once admired was faltering. Mrs. Patterson, ever watchful, noted the absence of laughter in the fields and the careful, deliberate manner in which Amelia now moved about her property. The gossip, though subtle, added pressure, reminding both John and Amelia that their lives were no longer private, and that any misstep could amplify the tension already simmering between them. One afternoon, Amelia finally confronted John. She met him at the edge of the pasture, arms folded, expression stern yet vulnerable. "John," she began, voice steady despite the turmoil in her chest, "I need to know the truth, everything. No more half answers, no more secrets. I can't trust someone who hides things from me, even if the intentions were good." John sighed, his shoulders heavy with regret. "I should have told you from the start. I thought I was protecting you." "Protecting us. I didn't realize the weight of my silence until now. I understand if you can't forgive me, Amelia." Her gaze softened briefly, but the hurt lingered. "I don't know if I can," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need time to think, to figure out what this all means for me, for the land, and for us." And so, by mutual but unspoken agreement, they began a slow, painful separation. John withdrew to the far reaches of the ranch, focusing on his work with an intensity that masked the emptiness he felt. Amelia retreated into her farmhouse, burying herself in labor and the small comforts of solitude. Their interactions became minimal, limited to practical necessities, each word measured and cautious, yet even in separation, their connection persisted. Glances lingered across the fields, unspoken emotions hung in the air, and both felt the ache of what had been lost. The bond they had nurtured, built over weeks of shared labor, laughter, and subtle intimacy, was not easily broken. The Harper Ranch, once a place of promise and growing warmth, now echoed with the tension of unresolved feelings. The storm had passed, but the after-effects remained, leaving John and Amelia to navigate the painful terrain of trust, betrayal, and the fragile hope that their relationship might survive the trials that fate had placed before them. Weeks passed with the Harper Ranch cloaked in quiet tension. The air seemed heavier, and even the fields seemed subdued, as if the land itself had sensed the fracture in John and Amelia's connection. Both had taken time to reflect, each grappling with their emotions and the impact of the shocking revelation that had threatened to tear them apart. Yet, beneath the layers of hurt and mistrust, a persistent truth remained. Their bond was real, fragile but undeniable, and it deserved a chance at healing. It was Amelia who first made the move toward reconciliation. One crisp morning, she walked across the dewy fields to where John was repairing a fence. Her posture was steady, but her hands betrayed a flicker of nervousness. "John," she began, voice firm yet gentle, "I've had time to think, and I realize now that anger and distance won't solve anything. If we are to move forward, we need to face the truth together, about the land, about the past, and about us." John paused mid-swing, his hand frozen on the hammer. He looked at her, reading the determination in her eyes and sensing the quiet vulnerability beneath it. Slowly he nodded. "You're right," he said. "It's time we confront it all. Openly, no more secrets. No more assumptions." Together they revisited the yellowed letter and other documents, piecing together the history of the land and the complex agreements that had shaped its ownership. John shared what he knew about his family's past decisions, including the choices his father had made and the reasons behind them. Amelia listened, asking questions, sometimes pressing for clarity, but never with the anger that had dominated their previous interactions. She saw his honesty, felt his sincerity, and began to understand the weight he had carried silently for years. The process was painstaking but cathartic. They debated, clarified misunderstandings, and acknowledged mistakes. By confronting the past directly, they found that the hidden truths, though painful, could be transformed into lessons rather than barriers. Amelia recognized that John's intentions had been protective, not malicious, and John realized that withholding information, even for good reasons, had caused more harm than honesty ever could. Beyond the practicalities of the land, they also confronted the emotional truths between them. Sitting together beneath the sprawling oak tree where they had first truly noticed each other, they spoke openly about their fears, desires, and lingering grief. Amelia admitted her hesitation to trust again after losing her husband, and John shared the deep loneliness that had defined his life since Mary's passing. In this shared vulnerability, a new layer of understanding emerged, replacing tension with connection, uncertainty with trust. By the end of the day, the reconciliation was complete. The documents were organized, the legal matters clarified, and most importantly, John and Amelia had reaffirmed their commitment to one another. They had faced the hidden truths not as adversaries, but as partners, discovering that honesty, patience, and mutual respect could mend even the deepest fissures. As the sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the fields in gold and crimson, John took Amelia's hand. The storm of the past weeks had passed, leaving the land and their hearts renewed. The ranch, once a place of solitude and whispered doubts, now felt alive with possibility. Together, they had turned the revelation that had threatened to divide them into a foundation for trust, intimacy, and a shared future. In that moment, under the vast expanse of sky and amidst the gentle rustle of the fields, John and Amelia realized that the hidden truths of the past had, in the end, strengthened the bond between them. What began as suspicion and tension had transformed into hope, resilience, and the quiet certainty that together they could face anything the world, or the land, might throw their way. The first light of dawn spilled across the Harper Ranch, casting a gentle glow over the fields and pastures that had witnessed so much of John and Amelia's journey. The air was crisp and fresh, carrying the scent of earth and dew, and for the first time in weeks, the ranch seemed to breathe in harmony with its inhabitants. What had once been a place of solitude, tension, and whispered gossip now resonated with hope, warmth, and the quiet promise of new beginnings. John and Amelia stood together on the porch of the farmhouse, watching the sun climb above the horizon. Their hands were intertwined, fingers laced naturally, as if the bond between them had always been meant to endure. The past, the secrets, the misunderstandings, the stormy weeks of separation felt like distant echoes. In their place was trust, understanding, and a shared vision for the future, one that included both the land they loved and the life they were determined to build together. Amelia had fully settled into her new home, her farmhouse now a cozy reflection of her personality and determination. The garden she had started with such care bloomed vibrantly, and the fields under her care flourished under her attention and hard work. John had resumed his routine on the ranch, but now instead of moving through the land alone, he moved with Amelia by his side, sharing in the labor, the laughter, and the quiet moments that made each day meaningful. The town of Cedar Creek gradually adjusted to the new reality. The gossip that had once surrounded them slowly faded, replaced by quiet acceptance. Neighbors began to see them not as a scandalous pair, but as a partnership built on mutual respect, resilience, and dedication to the land. Amelia's competence and determination earned her the admiration of the townsfolk, while John's unwavering integrity and strength became evident to all who had once doubted him. Life at the ranch settled into a harmonious rhythm. Mornings were spent tending to the cattle and fields, afternoons in shared projects or quiet conversation, and evenings by the fireplace, exchanging stories or simply enjoying each other's presence. The bond between John and Amelia deepened with every shared sunrise and sunset, every challenge overcome, and every small triumph in the day-to-day tasks that defined ranch life. In time, their love blossomed into something even more profound. They spoke often of the future, a family perhaps, and the continuation of the Harper legacy on the land they both cherished. Amelia's initial hesitation to trust had transformed into a steadfast faith in John, and his long-standing solitude had given way to the warmth of companionship he had not realized he had been craving. Together, they discovered that love could be both gentle and resilient, capable of thriving even after heartbreak and loss. One evening, as the sky blushed with the hues of twilight, John and Amelia stood hand in hand, gazing across the rolling fields. The wind carried the soft rustle of grass, the distant lowing of cattle, and the faint murmur of life on the ranch. They smiled at each other, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they had shared, the trials, the revelations, the conflicts, and ultimately, the victories of honesty, trust, and love. The Harper Ranch, once a landscape of isolation and struggle, now symbolized growth, renewal, and the enduring power of connection. John and Amelia had turned challenges into lessons, secrets into understanding, and solitude into a shared life filled with hope and possibility. The future stretched before them like the endless plains, wide, open, and inviting, and so, beneath the vast expanse of sky and amid the gentle whispers of the fields, John Harper and Amelia Carter embraced a new chapter together, a chapter defined by love, resilience, and the promise of countless new beginnings. The ranch had given them not only a home, but also the chance to build a life together, proving that even in the harshest landscapes, hearts can heal, bonds can strengthen, and love can thrive.